You're a man. 18, 20, 22, maybe even 28. Your family is kind of a shambles. Perhaps you were born without a father. Perhaps your parents got divorced when you were young, or perhaps your dad just wasn't present because he was too busy working to provide. You grew up with not much money, or you grew up in a middle-class household where that stuff didn't really matter. You went to a public secondary school, or a comprehensive as we call them in the UK, and you were taught for your entire life that being a man was something inferior, something hated, something that made the world worse. But above all, you weren't taught anything practical. You weren't taught how to live life. You weren't taught what life meant. So you're at this age and you realise you're lacking these things, and so you go out. You go out and you look and you see what other people have to say about how to live life. And who do you see? You see the topic of this video. You see Andrew Tate. Popular man, rich man, has a lot of women, quite a successful man. Somebody who makes sense, somebody who will call out those things which are wrong. Someone who will point out how much of an unfair advantage women have in the court system. Somebody who will point out that a lot of women are simply just arrogant and a complete waste of time. Somebody who will show you how to obtain freedom, at least on the face of it. And so you go and listen. You go and listen and you follow what he's saying. Now, I was involved with this sphere before Andrew Tate became big. I recognised, reading his book, a lot of tropes that have been around for quite a while. And I can tell you right now that you are chasing something that you do not want. Now, what exactly is Andrew Tate talking about in this book? Because it's basically just a compilation of different sayings of Andrew Tate across Twitter or across different podcasts and different interviews. What is he pushing? And what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about the pursuit of women, the pursuit of money, and the pursuit of power. Now, I happen to think that Andrew doesn't actually care that much about women or even money. He says at one point in the book that he'd rather be at his father's funeral. I think what he's really interested in, and, you know, it makes sense, is power. I think ultimately that's what drives him. And so I'll deal with power first and why it really may not be advisable to pursue the sort of power that Andrew is pushing. Now, what is power? It is the ability to do something according to your own will. So, you can be in a situation with friends, and if you can put pressure on them to do something, then that's power. Now, why is pure power a bad thing? Why is simply having power without any kind of real good purpose a bad thing? Well, because it leads to a situation of tyranny. Now, tyranny doesn't have to be on the state level, and this is something that Andrew has gone on record of complaining about because of the tyranny of Western countries, which I'm not going to deny because they are, right? In my own country, somebody was arrested for silently praying outside of an abortion clinic. It is ridiculous. It has to stop. And this is the thing, right? He's like a saltwater oasis in the middle of a desert. But back onto the point of power. You end up with tyranny in personal relationships. You end up with tyranny in financial relationships. And you end up, most obviously, with tyranny in political relationships. And make no mistake, the family is the fundamental basis of all politics. So, how can we see this tyranny? How can we see the effects of this tyranny? Just look at Andrew's life. Look at Andrew's life. Like, you can see from the moment that he establishes his Camgirl empire that there's this power manipulation going on. So, for example, in his book, he talks about how if one of the girls left, they'd have a party where they would basically sit there and rip into the woman. And the idea behind this is that this would disincentivize the women from leaving because they wouldn't want to be mocked. Of course, nobody likes to be mocked, nobody likes to be bullied. You know, it is often sinful. It is often contrary to what we want to be as human beings, to be mocking people. And so he has this kind of dictatorship, and the guy will try and cope throughout his whole book. Oh, well, I never forced anybody with my hands. Wow, I didn't force anybody with my hands, because he knows he's guilty. He knows he's guilty of creating a structure that does nothing but destroy. It's like squeezing the toothpaste out of the toothpaste container, right? With these women, he's just squeezing out the value and destroying them in the process. Not only through the stress that if they leave, they're going to get this, but also through the very demeaning nature of the work itself. Some of the stuff, like, as much as these women may not have been conscious and they might have thought it was funny, it doesn't really matter what the women thought, because women don't define their own essence. And Andrew knows that. The mere fact that Andrew can even talk in his book about power dynamics and how women operate means that he knows that women have an essence beyond what they control, and likewise with men. So simply hand-waving it and saying, oh, well, everyone was consenting, right? Complete nonsense. And he knows it. It was a system of, and I'm not going to say, like, everything is abuse, but it really was. And that is the problem with power for its own sake. The problem with power for its own sake is that because you, my friend, watching this, are corrupt, because you are evil, as am I, that when we get things that don't have an explicitly good end to them, we end up causing sin. We end up causing problems, as Andrew did. If we pursue things simply because it makes me more powerful or it makes me more egotistical. Now, there's a difference between having a job so you can survive and having power so that you can have something on top of that so you can feel powerful, right? Of course, a job is fine or something, or you know, having your own business is fine, right? But if you're pursuing things with a bad end, then it's going to have bad results. And we see this in Andrew's life in his own bloody words. The difference is that he will say that, oh, he'll hand-wave it as stupid moralizing, right? Kind of related to this power thing, and this will lead into the issues of money and women. The interesting issue is that Andrew is actually an extremely moral person. Now, what do I mean by this? Morality, as it ought to be considered, not how modern people have conflated it as basically this strange moral instinct that no one ever really thinks about, is essentially doing things to make yourself better. It is choosing the correct end in life. It's choosing those steps which are necessary to reach that. It is all strategy, as Andrew would be able to attest. Now, he's an extremely moral person because he considers how to get from point A to point B. The trouble is that his ends are false, as we've just said with power. Now, why women? Why is it a bad thing to just muck around with women your whole life, right? Why? Because it will make you despair, as I'm sure many people who have had hedonistic spirals will be able to tell you. It will make you arrogant, because frankly there is much more about the ego going on when you're having sex with a random woman than there is about the actual pleasure itself. It's an egotistical pleasure. And it also disconnects you from reality, because as you keep doing these fornications, you're just going to grow in pride, and that's going to disconnect you from reality, because pride is defined as the separation from reality, and humility is the submission to reality. Now, Andrew doesn't submit to reality. The very first chapter of his book is about creating an ego so that you can pursue it and therefore be successful. But that's imagining a lie, because that's not what you are. You aren't that ego. Now, you can have ends in life and things that you can pursue, but that's not the same as an ego. Saying you're the man. It's not true. Look at your life. You're a mess. Look at Andrew. He's a mess. He's in prison right now. He's spent all his time pursuing women, wasting his time. Wasting time that could have been devoted to something more important like the pursuit of God. It's silly. It's bloody ridiculous. Now, on top of that, naturally you're offending God, but you're also darkening your own ability to reason. I'm sure all of us who have been to secondary school have seen how people fight over girls, or how girls fight over guys, right? It's completely ridiculous. You know why? Because it ultimately forgets that romantic relationships are a relationship between two people. Whereas in these fights, it's a turf war, right? I've done it. It's really stupid. It's a turf war over a particular woman or a particular guy. And so it doesn't actually... It's pseudo love. It's a lie. So you see this effect in people who are under the sway of lust or their teenage passions. Stupidity emerges. You also see an attempt to overthrow right order, because right order recognizes how dangerous sex is and tries to control it. As you should be. You should not be masturbating. You should not be thinking unclean thoughts. You should be, whenever they come to mind, drawing your mind away from them. People hate Christianity for a reason, and that's because Christianity tries to control this because it understands why it's wrong. They hate organised religion generally, because most of them recognise to lesser or greater extent how dangerous this stuff is. But because of the pride, because of the puffed up nature of the person who's addicted to their own pleasure, they try and overthrow things. So really, the actions towards women that Andrew describes, all they're going to do is make you worse. They're going to make you rise up against sheer reason, and you're going to be miserable. Finally, money. Money is important. None of us survive without money in this world, with very, very few exceptions. Do even the homeless. Now, Andrew kind of gets this, I think, because he talks in one of the earlier chapters of his book about how women don't really care about your bank account. They don't really care about the number that is on your bank account. They care about the display of money. Now, not always in a crude way, not driving up in a Lambo, but having the trappings of a decent amount of money. Now, this reminded me, funnily enough, of something that, of all people, St. Thomas Aquinas talked about. And he makes a distinction between artificial and natural wealth. Now, artificial wealth is money. It's money that human beings have created. And then there's natural wealth, which are things like food, water, presumably things like shelter, the things that are necessary to survive and to have freedom. Now, what Andrew is basically saying, in my mind, is that women are attracted to natural wealth. And I think this is, to a large extent, true. They have to be. How else are you going to raise a kid without food on the table? But, first of all, this obviously isn't all women. There are women who are nuns. And also, it misses the whole emphasis on natural goods that are necessary to be free and to survive. He goes to excess. There is no need to be a millionaire. Maybe there is a need to be like a millionaire now. Actually, I'll take that back. There's no need to be somebody who has £10 million. As of the date of this video being released, I don't know what the inflation is going to do. What is necessary is to have sufficient natural wealth to be able to survive. Now, this would have been a lot easier in a saner time, I think. This would have been probably not even necessary in maybe the 14th or 15th century. Because the powers that be were not crazy. They were not idolatrous people who were pushing evil on their subjects. They had their issues, so maybe you could argue, yes, it would have been. But nonetheless, the pursuit of wealth beyond what is necessary to sustain a good lifestyle is a waste of time, because there is no use for artificial wealth beyond a certain point. There is only so many times a day that you can eat. There is only so many times a day that you can pay your rent or buy a house. There's only so many times, a year that you can have another child and have to feed them. There's a hard limit on how much money is necessary. So the pursuit of money is, past a certain point, a waste of time. And that's what I'd say about this book. There are better ways of acquiring better wisdom than going and reading Andrew Tate's book. And I would say this for the majority of the self-improvement influencers as well. Just stop following them. I'll give you a couple of books that I'd recommend starting with. One of the books that was really important in my life, also, believe in God, because he is bloody real. Keep following the channel to find out why. One of the books that really changed my life is The Desert Fathers. Now, I understand that Elliot Hulse, ironically we share a first name, has talked at length about these men. They are amazing. Do not take everything they say at face value. You need more than 2 hours sleep. But these were some of the freest people to ever live. And they were poor hermits in the Egyptian desert. They were incredibly disciplined, and they were heroic men. And you can learn a lot more from them than you can learn from Andrew Tate. Because Andrew Tate, by his own admission, is not a good person. Another book I'd recommend that I don't have, a friend of mine is borrowing it, is The Life of St. Francis of Assisi by St. Bonaventure. You'll find this in a collection of books known as The Classics of Western Spirituality, under the Bonaventure title. It will tell you again of another man who is exceptionally poor, but somebody that all of you have probably heard of. I'd have heard of St. Francis of Assisi when I was an 8-year-old boy, and I wasn't even Catholic. Extremely important figure, and certainly not the hippie that you think he is. Extremely hardcore man. Like, the man was for a lack of a better term, he was pretty base. And then finally, I'd recommend going and reading the Bible with a good commentary. I would go and buy a Dwyer Reams and check out the Haydock commentary and just read through the New Testament a few times. If you follow language learning, recommendations from people like Father William Most, 6 times will do it. And then, look at the commentary. Don't read just random commentaries because you'll get weird stuff out of it. You have to be selective with the commentaries. And also bear in mind that there's a lot of complicated stuff going on there, so you won't get it, Always. I still don't get it. I probably will never get everything in there. Same with the Old Testament. In particular, if you want self-improvement advice, go and read Proverbs and Sirach. So yeah, that's the video. Please like and subscribe and annihilate that subscribe button. Absolutely cluster bomb my Patreon, and I will see you guys later. Bye bye.